Awesome.
Sorry, yes.
All good. All right. So the four people on this stage represent four different vantage points on pretty much the same problem. NERC has been sounding the alarm about new reliability dynamics with large dynamic loads interacting with high renewable penetration to create seconds level operational challenges. The people on this panel and in this room, operators, compliance leaders, tech folks, and the regulators are the ones who have to make all this work. So we're going to spend the next 50 minutes, 45, 50 minutes or so working through this from four angles. Erin from NextEra is going to be focusing on kind of that operator perspective. Terry from HSI brings decades of organizational operations across disciplines within the utility org. And as Siefken from LDES Council will talk about the position of long duration storage in a reliable grid. And Amit will bring in the lens that kind of you just heard, the automation and the AI and how compliance workflows themselves need to evolve. So, Erin, I would like to start with you. And first, I'd love to have you kind of give a little bit of background about you, what you do at NextEra, and then I will kind of introduce the first question.
Thanks,
Erin?
Adam.
Okay,
It's been
cool.
a pleasure to be a part of Grid Innovation Hub since pretty early on. So I'm
Yeah.
with NextEra Energy, the parent company of both NextEra Energy Resources and Florida Power and Light. So we provide both wholesale power to the grid through NextEra Energy Resources and then the vertically integrated utility that we lovingly call Florida Power and Light. You can see behind me. I support the onboarding of new reliable renewable assets such as solar, battery in particular, and that's across the country through both entities. So as such, I cover the entire country, and as we seek, and we have had longstanding wind operations and natural gas, including 5 nuclear plants throughout the country. We're kind of in it all, and we've seen the evolution of the industry. So we're excited to be a part of the solution and build this resilient grid and resilient assets to make sure that we're solving these problems together for our customers and for the grid.
Wonderful. And first question I have for you is, so NextEra is operating one of the largest, most diverse fleets in the country. From your seat, what does large load growth actually look like on the ground, and how is it changing the day-to-day operations for your compliance and operations teams?
So instead of just building large generation assets, we're thinking of building large loads as well, and really coming to the customers and finding out where they're siting these large loads. Typically, we would build a generation in a congested area or meet and respond to an RFP in a specific, somewhat known location. But now we have these even behind the meter proposals, right, that are really kind of changing the way we're all thinking. So instead of just generation equals load, now we're thinking load and generation are sort of jockeying for position. And that's really changing the way we're thinking. And it's locale by locale. And it's really changing the industry as a whole.
Awesome. Next up, Terry, would love to get kind of a little bit of information about your background and what you do at HSI.
Uh, yeah, thanks. Terry Bilkey, HSI. I have a lot of gray hair, spent about 20 years as a system operator, some nuclear training along the way, and then went to one of the ISOs and did operations support, and compliance and NERC engagement. So I try to view this problem or this issue as, kind of a broad spectrum. Is how do you keep people safe, the public safe? How do you stay in business? How do you maintain the grid reliability? And then when standards come into play, how are you going to be ready for them?
Wonderful. So, first question for you, considering kind of all the hats you currently wear and have had, is when rapid load growth and rapid project onboarding put pressure on things like safety, reliability, business outcomes, and compliance all at the same time, how do you like to prioritize where to kind of tackle that first?
Okay, and if I could back up just a little bit,
Yeah.
and I'll dive into that. Is that the announcement for the seminar kind of talks about large loads compliance, generators and so on. So I'm guessing the audience here, we've got, different audiences. We got some large loads that are relying on the grid and not bringing generation as part of it. They're relying on that. They got large loads with affiliated generation. And then you got generators that might be in the neighborhood of a new load. And then obviously you got the grid operators and planners. So when you have that situation, and you're putting something into place as far as getting off target, the primary driver is, saying I recall is that, when you're up to your neck in alligators, sometimes you forget that the original goal was to drain the swamp. So why are you there? And you're gonna be focused on getting that project across the finish line, but yet you need somebody in the background that is looking at the risks and how you're getting ready for the risks, and then how do you communicate that's your ultimate preparation. That once the key is turned, are you going to be a reliable operator of that facility? And a key that might be overlooked is, while there's a lot of business to business discussions, executive level and so on, you need somebody at the ground level. You need who's going to answer the phone at the load. And if it's load with generation, is it going to be the same person? What are their constraints and limitations? If they lose power external, what is the effect on them? Is an early warning desirable? I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but you need that dialogue at the ground level on once we turn the key on this, who needs to talk to who, what information do we need in real time, day ahead, those kinds of things to make it happen. So again, when you start putting out fires, you lose focus on your risks. And I try to, as a system operator, they kind of put things in perspective. Your top priority is always safety of personnel, the public, equipment, and safety is not under NERC's purview. As a matter of fact, it takes precedence to NERC standards. You'll find that in a lot of standards, you get a directive to do something, but if safety is going to be impacted or the equipment's going to be impacted, you have to explain the situation and come to resolution. So safety is number one. That's your first risk area. Somebody needs to own all the risks you identify in safety. Might be fairly few in the case of a large load, but you might have storage that there are certain hazards associated with that. But again, somebody has to lay out what are the risks of the safety area. With regard to grid reliability, what are my impacts on the grid? What are the grid's impacts on me, and how do we address those? Compliance, if you do compliance right, compliance should be basically one and the same as reliability, because the standards, if well crafted, should support reliability. Compliance should not be, I'm creating a whole bunch of pieces of paper that an auditor come look at, but how do I know that I'm doing the right thing now, or how do I know I'm going to be able to do the right thing when rare situations occur? And then comes your business. How do I, make sure that, my data center is doing what it's supposed to do? How do I make sure that the grid's reliable and so on? So again, your priorities are the safety, reliability, compliance, and business. In each of those areas, you need some experts that will own each of those risks. And then start to lay out, what are we doing with regard to those risks? What would you say to a person, what you're doing with regard to those risks? How do you prove what you're doing with regard to those risks? And then ultimately you need a dashboard or something that communicates where we at in addressing these, such that, the executives that are involved in the project, have this on their radar and can see that, hold it, we're in good shape, we're making progress, or hold it, we're lagging and maybe we're not focusing on the right things. I've rambled a lot. I do have some speaker notes that people want to get them later on, you'll be able to request those. So hopefully in that discussion, I addressed your overlying question.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. The perspective on that as it goes is going to be important for something that I see a lot, being out here in kind of Silicon Valley world around all the folks building these data centers, is that really technical compliance and operational piece right now is sometimes missing in their perspective. Not through any fault of their own. It's just a new world for them, right? A lot of their thoughts are around, okay, how many megawatts of compute can I get, and how much, what's the financial implications of this, and how does that work? And there's a lot more down the line, and they're finding that, as a lot of the conversation that with John Chaney was around is, they're actually really not quite ready to get interconnected the way they need to, to meet their goals. Next, I'm going to have Anna introduce herself, give a little bit of a background, and then ask the first question of her.
So good afternoon. My name is Anna Siefken. I'm the Director for Policy and Markets in North America for the Long Duration Energy Storage Council, or the LDES Council. So we are a global trade association that's looking at deploying and scaling long duration energy storage, which we define as 8 hours or longer globally. So the focus that we have is to make sure that
we got broke up a little bit there.
Sorry about that. I don't mean to be so glitchy, but hopefully you caught that. So long duration energy storage really is ready to go, and we are deploying around the world, looking at the United States in particular for our next activities.
Amazing. So first question for you, where is long duration storage actually being deployed today? And how are you tackling the gaps between what it can currently technically provide and what compliance and resource adequacy frameworks currently recognize?
So long duration energy storage, again, 8 hours, I want to make sure that wasn't a part in the glitchiness, is deploying around the world. So we have technology companies that are a part of our cohort that have 50 technology deployments. They're happening everywhere. They're just not happening in the United States as fast as they could, but we are seeing some very recent activity. So for example, Hydrostor has a Willow Rock project in California, 500 megawatts, 4,000 megawatt hours of advanced compressed air that has received its final CEC permits in recent weeks. Noon Energy recently closed a 25 megawatt, 2.5 gigawatt deal with Meta just last month. And that's with 1 gigawatt, 100 gigawatt hours pipeline behind it. So these aren't demonstrations. These are actual projects. They're deploying across the country. The last one I'll mention is Form Energy has a 1.5 megawatt project. 150 megawatt hour iron air project with Great River Energy in Minnesota that's supposed to come online in the next year or so. So the gap that we see is really structural. So resource adequacy and the frameworks associated with it were built for a grid that is no longer the same, right? So the grid was built for less volatility than what we're currently seeing. And so particular systems that can hold 8 to 24 to 50 to 100 hours are just not being valued appropriately. There's certainly they need to be made more valuable and seen as more valuable for resiliency and reliability, because we're seeing these extreme weather events that are, again, new, right? We're seeing a lot more hurricanes. We're seeing a lot more multi-day outages. And this is where LDES can play a really critical role as infrastructure. So a short duration battery, I'm going to make a distinction between a short duration battery and a long duration energy system. So a short duration battery, 4 hours, typically lithium ion, has a very important role to play. But these longer duration systems, 8 hours and longer, can actually hold energy for significantly longer periods of time, which can help you with seasonal load shifting. It can help with these multi-day events, weather events in particular. But unfortunately, the structural piece is the ELCC, the effective load carrying capacity, because those methodologies don't necessarily distinguish between this 4-hour capacity and what it can do and a 100-hour capacity on a different duration. So they're both treated as storage, kind of generically. So what we are doing is making sure that bankability and revenue stability is available to attract project finance. And that is kind of the struggle where we are with long duration energy storage. So we need to distinguish long duration energy storage from batteries. We need to recognize that valuation gap which the ELCC methodologies don't currently address. We need to work on the bankability problem, which is kind of like my focus day in and day out, is to help investors understand the risks, and then to actually focus on resource adequacy in a couple of key areas in the country, California, PJM, and ERCOT in particular. So we're really focused on how to get as many projects as possible moving forward and get them at scale. Thanks.
Amazing. Amit, last but not least on here, I know you just got off of chatting, but still give us another intro because we've had new folks come in.
Sure. My name is Amit Patel. I'm a managing director, but I also work with probably, like I said, up to 50 clients. So I feel like I have a good pulse on, how everybody's doing, adapting. The areas I'm working are mostly around generation, real-time systems, and compliance, and especially OMP compliance.
Awesome. And so on that note, when you look at compliance teams trying to scale up to meet just load growth or adding, many new projects each year, where are they hitting walls and what workflows are you seeing break first?
So really, to be honest, I feel like at most companies, the compliance teams are not built for scale, especially with renewables. Where it breaks, and I think it was Terry who pointed this out, right? There's this process where it's pieces of paper. There's so much focus on documentation and document management, right? And it's really needed because if you get an audit, you're in trouble. You have to, dot your I's, cross your T's, whatever you need to do. But what I like to think of this is that it's a somewhat reactive instead of an active, right? So if you have active compliance, you are making sure that, hey, it's integrated into the entire ethos of the company. So for example, if you look at real-time operations, okay, I have to worry about a real-time outage happening, right? Because it affects everything. It affects the grid, it affects my dollars, all of this. But a lot of these other things, the compliance is often, okay, something happened later. Well, do I comply? What do I do? So for me, the evidence collection breaks first out of everything. And it is a big, big problem because, um, every audit cycle, you're looking at 5 different systems. Well, if you actually did it properly and everything's integrated, you have one source of truth and it's all reliable and you're going to be able to bring it all together. And really, instead of, and what I see is a lot of teams will just throw people at it. But when you have lots of data and lots of complexities, you can't just throw headcount at it and add more people. You really have to scale the process. And part of that process is going to be technical data architecture, making sure everything, makes sense and is done properly. So, and it really isn't knowledge. It's just data infrastructure was never built for this volume or velocity, and you don't have the processes either. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually going to stick with you here for the first set of group questions, which is coming off of that. Where does the time actually go in the compliance function today? And where can automation realistically move the needle versus where is automation maybe a little overhyped?
Sure. So, I think a lot of it, so much of it is just going into like evidence aggregation and formatting. And again, what somebody said, it's just piece of paper, right? And there's just so much work to do. I feel like it's not as holistic where you have processes and everything's coming in and you're doing the documentation, but then you also have a ton of KPI and review and processes, what Stephen Covey says, sharpening the saw, right, to improve. Um, and it's not for lack of wanting to do it. I just think that compliance professionals are overwhelmed and a lot of these end up becoming IT. They need to be IT solutions, right? And you need to have IT involved. But what happens is that you're just putting out fires, right? Now, okay, like you have PRC 28, 29, 30 coming, everybody's rushing. Well, I need a fault recorder. I need to do this. And there's not a long thought out process of, well, okay, if you have a fault, this is what's going to happen, but then you're capturing all this other data. How are you going to get it here? What is the best way? And often to, comply, there's short-term solutions that are just built, and then they're never able to get to a better long-term solution, because then something else comes down the pipe, and the money may not be there to put there, or maybe it's just that they don't have time. But really, it's just, we have to get out of this aggregation and formatting and really get into true automation and process flow, and having ability to review and improve in near real time as much as possible.
Great. And talking about scaling, I want to kind of bring this back to Erin, because her, NextEra is scaling across tons of different regions. And each region has very different profiles, right? Solar, wind, crypto, and AI load, co-located load and generation. Where are you seeing CILR type behaviors or sub-hourly volatility show up first, and how, and what's had to change in how you model and operate plants as a result?
The good news is we've seen across the country all of the different technologies first, and then we've
The Zoom bug has attacked Erin this time.
we don't operate.
Oh, you are back.
What are you thinking? Okay.
All right, let's try again. Maybe if we turn off your video.
As that Anna mentioned.
There.
Thank you. That's perfect.
Okay, I turned off your video. Let's see if that
Smile for me, everyone.
Yeah.
So the regions that we can point to, any of them, right, is local to Florida. We have FPL, so that's every single house, every single small center that we have. We want reliability, and reliability is paramount to safety, right, for our customers, and low cost. So we can look at California and the West in particular, where we have very high solar penetration. And then we also have, these really sophisticated large load customers that are trying to be in the market. And then we have the South, where I think that John Chaney, spoke, fairly thoroughly about ERCOT interconnection and just the appetite and the collaborative approach. I'm not in the interconnection space, I'm in the power generation space. So my assets are trying to operate as if they're not connected to the larger grid, but that's not really fair, right? Because that's the entire point of NERC and the LDES, is they're trying to solve for no matter where these assets are. So I can point to these different regions, and the customer interrupted load, I would say, I'm again not precisely in Virginia as my main load, but those events inform us all. So what does that mean for me as an owner and an operator? It comes down to the individual asset level. It comes down to, what are my suppliers doing when they build a battery management system? What are my integrators and EPCs doing, and when they build a battery management system and they integrate? And then what are my, I'll say, gentlemen's agreements with my customers, and what do I list as my capabilities, right? What is your use case? I think talking about your use case, as opposed to just saying I can do everything for anyone at any time. I think, right, we would all love to say that, but I think that we really must understand what we're talking about. Signal latency is one thing versus system stability, and actually slowing down the ramp rate of a battery because the ISO is asking you to do so. And that might in itself actually reduce the interruptible loads that folks are seeing. Perhaps not from a very large load that instantaneously trips and decides that it needs to protect itself. But I think that we're all trying to inform each other of, just because I'm capable of something doesn't mean that I'm always going to operate 0 to 60 in 10 seconds, 5 seconds, and vice versa. So I think across the regions, we're seeing, just to kind of reiterate, whether that's, California has the high solar penetration with some weak pockets. So you need some grid forming storage if at all possible. the south and ERCOT, I think that John Chaney mentioned, right? You have a lot of wind and you have so low inertia, you might have some forced oscillations and some other coordinated ride through events. That's what NOGRR was born out of, was this, concept of ride through, and wind kind of paved the way for a lot of the thought process. But I think that all these technologies are testing that. And then if you think about the Midwest, you have these really concentrated long radials, with co-located load and generation. And so you really have to look at angular stability and other, restoration considerations with multi-day outages that may occur with regards to storm or just, other customer-based outages. So those are kind of the top 3 regions that I'd highlight, but there's some solutions for that, like grid forming inverters, which I would say are not ubiquitous, but we're all interested in how to solve the problem from the generation side as well. Using, like Amit was saying, AI intelligence to really forecast sub-hourly load, whether that's on your system or the greater system, or if you're hub settled, right? It really kind of depends if you're wholesale or retail, but then also looking at all of your models and what kind of models, and I don't do transmission modeling, but we're all customers of the granularity with which those models are being performed, and challenging ourselves to, build the Internet of Things around that, almost on-prem, so that we can get the right data at the right time without, collecting those billions of tags that they were talking about, just in the event that you have a situation. So I hope that gives some color about what we're thinking about, but holistically, I think that's where we're all at as an industry, and just pick a region that you're trying to solve the problem for and a technology that can do it for you.
Great. Yeah, I think that kind of goes really well into what I want to ask Terry next, which is around rolling these things out, right? Terry, give us kind of the pattern of missteps that you watch out for, maybe you've seen during some of these rapid rollouts. And if you handed this room a 5-question kind of self-assessment to gauge their compliance maturity right now, what are those 5 questions that you would ask?
Okay. And really haven't been involved in large load deployment, but the closest parallel that we have is, the renewable technology and the rapid deployment of that, looking at the lessons learned there. Probably the biggest thing that I see from a compliance perspective is that, the people that install this equipment, once they've got commissioned it, they're on to the next project, and they're awful hard to contact. So generally, you got an inability to actually get information with regard to models, setups, compliance information that you have to submit to NERC and things like that. So you need to make sure you've got a handle on that if somebody's putting this project in for you. Ownership changes become an issue. The new person gets in, and they of course have a lot of priorities, and the compliance is always kind of a back office type thing. They worry about the first things first, and they may not staff that position when the ownership changes. Walkaways, project stops, while other people around them have taken action or are taking actions to address that. And now they have to backpedal and put the system back the way it was. And then internal turnover, when you got a new technology, a lot of development, people move around a lot, move from company to company and so on. So do you have a knowledge base such that if that person goes, somebody else is going to understand what the obligations are and what do I got to do to keep the things moving? And then probably the last thing, if you have your situation involves inverter-based resources, you want to make the key is, do they actually operate the way you expect them to? Sometimes the controls don't do what you expect, or they were set up based on some assumptions with regard to the grid, and they don't necessarily operate the way the grid needs them to operate. So as far as a quick self-assessment, if you want to do it, I've kind of talked about this before. You have to have a set of prioritized risks. Take those, safety, reliability, compliance, and business, and have I identified all the risks in that area, and then a set of controls that go along with it. From a simple perspective, having a person that owns that risk is a control. Can the owner explain, what they're doing to stay on top of that risk. That's generally what you need to demonstrate compliance as a first step. But then you also point to something that proves that you're doing what you say you're doing, or you're going to do what needs to be done when a rare situation occurs. And then, let's see if I have a couple others. I think that's about 4. And then obviously, if you have turnover, can you find that information? And then you ultimately have to be able to communicate that risk to people above you so that people are aware that, hey, some of these requirements no longer have an owner. 3 people left and nobody's taking care of these particular pieces of the puzzle. So at a high level, those are the things that you should be looking at.
Amazing insights there. I really appreciate that. Anna, over to you now here. So large loads like data centers are driving unprecedented capacity shortfalls across organized markets, and grid operators are scrambling to procure new resources fast enough to keep pace. But most of the compliance and reliability frameworks these operators are working within were designed for a very different grid. As we think about what it takes to meet this load growth reliably, how are operators and regulators thinking about the role of long duration energy storage, which can provide firm capacity, grid stability, and multi-day resilience in their compliance and resource adequacy frameworks? And what would it take to move fast enough to actually reflect that value before the next capacity shortfall arrives?
Well, you hinted on a really important thing, which is speed. So the technologies in many cases are ready. So there is kind of this misperception that many of these technologies are not ready. They are commercially available, they are out there, and what we're seeing is that the market hasn't yet been designed appropriately for them. So I know that we mentioned CAISO, we've talked about ERCOT, we've talked about PJM. They each have different market structures. And so those are the things that are kind of in the way right now. And so in addition to what you might find in with the utility, which Erin was sort of mentioning, there's these structural issues that we're finding that are still acting as barriers that need to be unlocked. So with CAISO, it's the ELCC methodology, which I was just talking about, but we've made pretty significant gains with that on resource adequacy in SB 100, which happened earlier this year. At PJM, there's a capacity market construct, which really is sort of getting in the way of the speed that's necessary to get things deployed and at scale. And in ERCOT, energy arbitrage and ancillary services aren't being properly valued. So there's winter storms that have happened recently that have put pressure on the system in ways that are had not been anticipated and are very highly disruptive. So I think the real thing that you mentioned is that as we think about sort of retirements of one type of technology, bringing in other technologies is going to require more long duration energy storage. So I think that we need to look across the entire country, and I wish that I could say there was a roadmap for every single state, but every state is very different in how it handles. Sometimes it's a really strong governor who pushes for it. Sometimes it's bottom up. And that's how, different storage mechanisms get put in place. But I think that overall, we have to advocate for different duration differentiated technologies. We need to make sure that there's carve outs so that these technologies can compete on a level playing field. We know right now that long duration energy storage, the total project cost is going to be coming down, according to our recently released benchmarking report, as much as 47%, depending on the technology type, between now and 2030. And that's just watching the scale, right? The scale, the more projects that you have out, the more the price can fall. So we're really hoping that between interconnection reform, permitting and siting regulatory reform, and then compression on these timelines because of the urgency is going to help. I can't also not mention geopolitical pressure that we're now seeing. So as the price of gas goes up, your basic consumer suddenly becomes interested in energy in a way they haven't before, and they put pressure on their politicians who put pressure on the whole system. So I think that we really do need to think about the cost of inaction in addition to the what this is going to cost us, because there is a huge economic disadvantage that we might see if we aren't taking the measures that we need to now. So hopefully I answered your question appropriately.
Yeah, wonderful. And just as we're going through these questions, I definitely want to encourage the audience to drop questions in the chat, to maybe one-on-one message if you'd prefer with different panelists. And we will have a full Q&A session just kind of right after this, plus networking.
Great.
I want to move on to kind of some cross conversation between panelists here. I want to start with Amit and Terry. Amit, when you're deploying tech into an organization that's scaling fast, what tells you that they're ready to kind of start employing these more complicated tools versus going to kind of like bolt-on tools that might just create new problems? And Terry, kind of alongside that conversation, would love to get your thoughts on where you are prioritizing this kind of tooling that talk about.
All right, you want me to start first, Adam?
Yes, please.
Let me see what the best way to. So really, it boils down to, for a lot of these, for any tech solution, you're going to need access to data. And often it's a Pi historian, a SCADA system, because a lot of this, is somewhat real time or near real time, or some sort of other internal systems. A client is ready if, for example, we're going in and, I said, hey, I need X, Y, and Z from these types of systems, then I can get that data. There's somebody that knows about, I'll just call it the data dictionary. For example, let's say they're Pi tags. So if I know where the AC breaker switch is or this or that, whatever those types of tags, that there's somebody that's in engineering that understands it. There's somebody technically that understands what the Pi tag names are and how it's used. And number two, and also, you're going to have different OEMs, right? And different things are stored different ways. So have they standardized it? And if they haven't standardized it, do they understand the differences between how things are stored, right? So, and then data access, right? Can I access that data? How is that data access? How is that governance? Are they set up so that, systems can access the data at scale, right? So if those two things fail, then what's going to happen is you can do it, but each thing implementation is going to be painful. You have room for error, and it's something that could take, 4 weeks can take, 5 months, because they're just not ready and they have to get folks and do a bunch of things. So I would start with that. That's probably the number one thing. Sorry, I'm not, Adam, you may be on mute.
Oops. Yeah, no, it's just encouraging Terry to include his input on this.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with those points. I look at this as, I always like to focus on the operator, the person at the ground level that makes sure that reliability is handled. And a lot of times, we come up, there's a new situation arise, the operator needs to be able to do something. And in general, some kind of a guide or some kind of process is going to set up for that operator to do something to stay on top of it. Well, that's fine for a day one situation, but the ultimate goal is to move the busy work away from the operator and start to use the automation to handle what's needed. And again, I back up to what is the risk? What is, how am I addressing it? Can I explain it? And what can I do to prove it? And if you've answered those questions and you're saving the thing that proves it, you don't have to necessarily look for that silver bullet day one that's going to create the audit ready package for somebody to look over, because the reality is you only get audited once every 3 years. But if somebody comes in the door and you can explain what you're doing and how you're doing it, and how you can prove you're doing it right, if you burrow down into the information, you have what you need, and you can improve things over time and increase, I think, through workflows and other automations, to make sure what you need is getting packaged and you don't have to spend time on the busy work with regard to assembling evidence.
Great, awesome kind of back and forth info there. I want to move over to Erin and Erin and Anna now to ask a question, kind of digging in a little bit more about long duration energy storage. Erin, you've mentioned me before, and maybe you mentioned it within this conversation too, is we're variable load. We're kind of living in a grid right now where variable load and variable generation are colliding at kind of like a really fast seconds level dynamics. And what role does LDES play in that, both as a reliability tool and as something compliance frameworks need to account for? Also, Erin, how are you thinking about co-locating storage with large loads or renewables?
So I'll jump in really quickly. The first thing I want to say is that Erin is incredibly technical in order to answer this question. So I'm going to answer it at sort of a high level, and then I'm going to let her sort of address some of the more technically detailed, because she is in it to win it at NextEra. So what long duration energy storage does is it smooths that intermittency. So what we used to see as intermittency from solar and wind, which was, it was actually reliable intermittency by comparison to the multi-second thousands of times that we're seeing blips with data centers. So there's a couple of different things that are converging. The one of them is that the technology is ready and can smooth. The other is co-location. So we are seeing behind the meter co-location. We're seeing in front of the meter solutions associated with data centers and large loads. And that, you can't talk about this multi-second without thinking about these large loads and all of the strain that they put on, I'm just going to say, the neighborhood, right? Because one of the most important things that we want to do as providers is make sure that no one loses their power, that no one knows that they missed a weather event, which is a really hard thing to explain to people. We missed the power, your power stayed on and you never knew there was an issue because we put in the resilience mechanisms that were necessary to make sure that you never knew what was going on. And so that's like the ultimate situation, and extremely difficult to sort of convey because people are used to having the lights come on. So I think that we can address resource adequacy with stress testing. We really need to be thinking about multi-day reliability for those larger, longer events. And we need to be thinking about capacity market products and interconnection rules that don't disadvantage systems that are trying to solve for this problem. And that co-location really does sort of mess with the timescales. We really need to have more capacity built that can be flexible to meet all of the intermittency that we're going to see and stress test it, making sure that we're treating co-location as maybe a proving ground so that we can demonstrate how well long duration energy storage can work on site. And then using sort of hybrid project models to close that compliance gap. So Erin, I'm going to throw it over to you because you probably have many more things to say on this particular topic.
Well, that's a good start.
That's right. I like tip of the iceberg for you.
Yeah, I think, there's, like I said before, there's multiple problems that we're solving and solutions that we solve for our customers, and whether we're representing a vertically integrated utility, right? Then we serve the load as it comes on, and we're eager to supply that growth. In fact, FPL has a new tariff just to kind of direct and define large loads, and that's a super exciting space to be in. So just regulatorily, I think that's one thing that FPL has done, which is exciting. And that's not a technical, but it takes lots of technical people to see around the corner to direct folks, to a tariff that can support that growth, as well as the, regions that growth is best suited for the near term. As far as, co-location and behind the meter versus the front of the meter, we're interested in being that solution provider for everyone. So that's why I said earlier, the use case is really mission critical, pun intended, right? We must really understand how this asset is being used and whether we're supplying that with storage under wind, for example, adding just grid stability, like a nice soft cushion to the entire grid historically, or we're adding a very robust, high, 99.999% reliable bespoke system for a standalone system. Those are completely different use cases. And I think that we, as a team that builds, system over system over system, 9 gigawatts this year, those are not all the same. It's not a cookie cutter. And explaining to ourselves, to our teams, and to our customers, and asking the right questions is really how we get there. So LDS is a part of that solution. And on the wholesale side, a lot of the times the customers are selecting those technologies and we're navigating those together, right? So whether we're bringing that to their attention, a lot of times I just want to clarify, right? Like those advocates are presenting those and evaluating those just as much as we are, and we help them navigate that. So we're agnostic in some ways, right? When we're performing in response to an RFP versus, right, some of the other technologies that we get to evaluate as a cost-effective solution, for our FPL customers. So it really does matter how the teams are thinking about reliability and making money. And it's my job to speak all those languages, but it's exciting stuff. And I'm glad I have Anna on the phone, literally speed dial. Adam, where'd you go?
Sorry, my dog was barking next to me, so I wanted to go on
Well, I
mute.
do love that dog.
I know, little Dio. Now he's being cute and sitting there. So question for Anna from the audience from Suhail Ahmad. As long duration energy storage becomes more important for grid reliability, how are you thinking about the use of AI in areas such as forecasting, dispatch optimization, asset health monitoring, and grid support decisions? More specifically, what governance and assurance controls are needed to make sure AI recommendations remain explainable, validated, monitored, and safe when storage assets are supporting reliability critical operations?
So I am going to say right off the bat that is not an area where I'm doing especially deep work. So I have ideas from a personal perspective, but professionally, those are decisions that we are working on. I mean, what we're doing is we're trying to convince states that long duration energy storage, or ISOs, RTOs, the PUCs, that long duration energy storage is valuable enough to go forward, right? So that's like step one. Now, what we want to do is make sure that AI is being used appropriately for all of the different ways that you just mentioned. It just doesn't happen to be a part of the conversations that we're having right now, but I can absolutely see it as something that's really important. So when we have conversations, for example, with FERC, this definitely could come up. And we would stand at the ready to help support with information. But right now, we're really just trying to figure out the best way to have data centers move forward in the first place, right? So we're at that load level more than we are at the how do we make AI solve the problems that might happen should we be lucky enough to have more LDES on the system. So I appreciate the question. Send me a note on LinkedIn. And I'll have somebody answer it more fully for you after this call.
Awesome. I'd actually love to get Amit's perspective on that too, because he talks to a lot of the folks within the utilities who are thinking about, hey, how are we going to do asset health monitoring? How are we dispatching? And all these other kind of decisions. Amit, can I get your perspective on that question?
Yeah, so what I'll say is it's a really powerful tool. The only thing I go back to when I talk about this with utilities and everybody is that it is not something that is, if you ask a question 5 times, you're going to get different answers. So you need to be careful. The process that I laid out earlier is that if you have a problem that you're solving, work with it to solve it. It can solve that problem, that could take months, probably within a week or so, right? And once you've solved it, you say, okay, is this reliable? What it's done, and you can go back and test it, and you can, rework it. But if you can get to a point where you're really happy with the solution, then you can operationalize that solution as software and make sure you understand that code. But where the benefits are going to be is that it's taking away the burden of writing the code, but you have to do all of this properly. There's a lot of nuance that I won't go into, but AI is amazing if you know how to do it and do it properly. But I'd say probably 1% of the people I come across really understand what and how to use some of this stuff. And that includes, there's people that are architects, etc. But it's powerful, but you have to do it properly. And if done properly, it can work wonders and it can really help, get us and get the grid to where it needs to, because all of these solutions, if you do it the old-fashioned way, they're going to take a lot of time. But if you can do it properly, then you can build solutions, 5-10 times faster than we've done before. So
Yep, I can actually add to that too. I think that we're using it for resource planning and forecasting. So in order to understand how much energy is necessary and needed, that's where I think AI is going to come in to play that role. You had already sort of said that in your question, but I did just want to double click on that. And now you can all hear my dogs because it started to rain.
Wonderful. So wrapping up the session here, I wanted to do a little bit of kind of a quick Q&A, like just single word or a couple word answers. We're going to do two of them, just go around. So I want to ask one thing is, what is the most overhyped innovation in compliance reliability right now? And what is the most underhyped innovation? And I'll start with Terry because you're first on my screen.
Okay. Overhyped. Well, I shouldn't say overhyped. It has its place. The silver bullet, the compliance automation tool that will create every piece of paper that NERC needs. And while they can do that, it takes a lot of time to set them up and somebody to care and feed it. That was more than one word, but it was a short answer.
Okay. And most underhyped, what do you think is being underutilized right now? It should be more.
Well, I like, the AI discussion, not at the level of what they're talking about here. That's way above my head, but AI can provide a lot of answers when you're trying to do some ground level work and trying to find solutions or find answers, or how is somebody else doing this particular problem, and it can help. But again, a simple repository that has workflows, that can remind people that it's time to do things, is that you got all the evidence where it needs to be, and it's there in place in case you got turnover. That's ultimately what you have to have.
All right. Thank you. Anna, your kind of quick fire question is, where is, in your mind, where is long duration energy storage going to be in 5 years?
Oh, I liked the other question better, but I'll
answer the other one. Do it.
Oh,
No,
I'm
do
kidding.
it.
I'm
Answer
kidding.
it. I like
Where's
that.
long duration storage going to be in 5 years?
Yeah.
Let's say everywhere. So I think that we have an opportunity that we shouldn't miss to really build in resilience, to aim towards affordability. We haven't talked a whole lot about safety, but I think thermal runaway is going to become a bigger issue when we're talking about where batteries can be built. And the distinction needs to be made between batteries and long duration. I think they're two different products and they need to be treated differently. And bankability is going to be a really important thing too. So in 5 years, we're going to have lots of long duration energy storage in all of the best locations, the most appropriate locations. Communities are not going to be disrupted, and the financing is going to be set. It's going to be bankable.
Awesome. Now go ahead and answer the other question because you seem very excited to do it. I want to hear your answer. Oops, you muted yourself there.
No, I was just thinking about what we should stop thinking about. And I think we should stop thinking about batteries as just 4 hours. I think we need to be thinking about 8 hours and longer storage systems, and things that we should kind of undervalued. Things that are undervalued is this importance of bankability. So I got to say my things. I just said them in a different framework.
Wonderful. All right, Amit, your quick fire one is, name one thing you think that the audience, maybe the reliability folks in the audience, should stop doing in 2026.
All right, that's a tough one. Yeah, I would just say stop kind of doing siloed work. Really think holistically. Compliance should involve, processes throughout the entire org. If you're just looking at it from a silo standpoint, often what you end up building is good, but it's not efficient or it's not comprehensive or thorough enough, and you're going to need iterations, and you're spending time and money that on a shorter term solution. So then
Amazing. Erin, last thing here, this exact same question for you. What is one thing the audience should stop doing in 2026? And maybe one thing they should start doing, kind of like Amit just said.
Oh yeah, we should start reading more.
Reading
And you
more.
can use AI co-pilots to do that as well. But we should stop. Yeah, we should stop thinking that our problems are unique and solve them together.
Amazing. I really like that. And actually, that is good for me to kind of pump up Grid Innovation Hub, because that is why I founded this last year, which is to bring the fast-moving world of tech a little bit closer to the historically slower-moving world of energy and utilities. That being said, we're going to move into a networking session about 15-20 minutes ahead of our final panel. We will also have a networking session at the end of, or after that panel, that can last to the end of the day. One more call out before we do that is check out some of our coffee chats. We host them once or twice a month. I just put a link in below in the resources for you guys to sign up for those. They're much less formal than this. We just come together, do a bunch of breakout rooms, chat with a couple of icebreakers. All right. So we're going to move into the breakout rooms now for the next 15 or 20 minutes while we set up for the next panel.